You've probably heard the same advice your whole life. Work hard, save your money, and play by the rules. It's presented as the standard path to security and a comfortable life, something you learn from a young age. But if a strategist like Niccolo Machiavelli were looking at that advice today, he might say that it's a good way to create a dependable employee, but not necessarily a good way to become financially independent. If you're feeling frustrated with your financial situation, it might be because you've been operating on the assumption that the economy is a completely fair system where hard work is always rewarded in direct proportion to your effort. That might be an incomplete picture. It's the story often told to keep things running predictably. People with significant wealth often aren't just playing the same game you are, but faster. They may be operating with a different set of principles altogether. They don't just earn money, they strategically position themselves to influence the flow of money, turning the system itself into an asset. They aren't always working harder, they're just positioned differently. This video will explore some principles, inspired by strategic thinking from 500 years ago, that are still used to make sure money flows to them, not just through their hands. This isn't about a new gimmick or chasing a trend. It's about understanding the mechanics of wealth and influence that are often right in front of us. To understand how money really works, it helps to first see it as not just a medium of exchange, but also as an instrument of control. It might sound strange, but it's possible to struggle financially partly because you're a reliable person. Many people are taught that if you're fair, patient, and loyal, the world will eventually reward you. You might be waiting for a reward from a system that doesn't operate on a moral basis. Niccolo Machiavelli, the philosopher studied by leaders for centuries, wrote about this reality 500 years ago. He observed that wealth and power don't always go to the most virtuous or talented, but often to those who are the most strategic and who understand human nature. The economic system we live in often encourages predictable behavior. When you're predictable, you can be managed. The advice you often hear, save your money, avoid risk, be a loyal employee, helps keep the system stable with you as a dependable part of it. You're often encouraged to be a consumer, not an owner. You might be encouraged to use your money to make your daily life more comfortable, maybe buying a nicer car for your commute to a job you feel stuck in, or a bigger screen to occupy your free time. Those with a different focus, meanwhile, use their money not to make their situation more comfortable, but to gain more control over their situation. Machiavelli's philosophy isn't about being malicious, it's about being effective. It's about seeing the world as it operates, not just as you wish it would. While you're focusing on being a good and dependable employee, a strategist might be figuring out how to own the system itself. While you are perfecting your resume to get a better salary, they are studying how to build a company that pays those salaries. The economy can be seen as a competitive environment, and for a long time, you may have been approaching it just with a resume and a cooperative attitude. It's useful to learn the other rules. Section 2. Principle 1. Control the flow, not the labor. Here's the first principle you may not have been taught. Wealth is often built by controlling the flow of money, not just by performing the labor. Most people are taught to focus on trading their time for a paycheck. You can think of them as the water in a river, moving, working, and generating power. But the water itself doesn't benefit from the energy it creates. The person who builds the dam, or the one who strategically places a turbine in the current, they're the ones who capture the value. The wealthy often aim to build the dam. They create systems, businesses, platforms, and intellectual property that are positioned at key points to capture value from everyone else. For example, a rideshare driver works hard and uses their own car, but the company that owns the app takes a percentage of every transaction. A content creator spends hours making a video, but the platform it's hosted on takes a share of the ad revenue. A factory worker puts in hours of labor, while a factory owner profits from the collective output. Many people chase cash. The strategist chases control and ownership of the system itself. Your whole life, you may have been taught to be the river, to work harder, flow faster, and be more productive. But it doesn't matter how hard the river works, it can't change its own course or decide where its energy goes. A strategic thinker doesn't just work in the system, they work to own a piece of it. They don't dig for gold, they sell the shovels. They don't just perform the labor, they control access to the work and charge a fee. It requires a shift from thinking in terms of tasks to thinking in terms of systems. At every step, you can ask yourself, am I the one doing the work, or am I the one who owns the framework where the work gets done? Until you make that shift, you'll likely be a source of energy for someone else's project. Section 3. Principle 2. Use money to buy position, not comfort. The second idea is that people with different levels of wealth often spend their money in different ways. When the average person gets a bonus or some extra cash, what's the common impulse? Usually it's to buy comfort or status, a bigger TV, a newer car, a vacation. This is spending to look like you have money, which is a pattern that can make it harder to actually accumulate it. This is spending that increases liabilities. A more strategic person doesn't just spend their money on short-term comfort, they spend it to acquire a better position. Position is about access, influence, and strategic advantage. They see money as a tool, not just as a reward. It's a resource to be used to acquire assets that generate more money and influence. For example, they might spend $10,000 on a ticket to an industry dinner. To an outsider, that seems like a huge expense, but the strategist sees it as buying access to a room full of people who could fund their next company. The wealthy often use money to buy back their time because they know time is the one resource that's truly limited. They'll hire assistants, automate tasks, and outsource anything that isn't their primary focus. Meanwhile, the more common approach is to trade time for money and then keep that money in a savings account where it can lose value to inflation. A strategist treats every dollar like a soldier sent on a mission. Each one has a job: to acquire more ground, whether that's by buying an asset that generates cash, investing in a network that opens doors, or acquiring a skill that provides leverage. The idea is to stop using money just to ease your daily struggles and start using it as a tool to improve your strategic position.
This way of thinking isn't what you hear every day, and that's understandable. If everyone adopted these strategies, the dynamics would change. I go deeper into some of these topics in exclusive videos for channel members, topics that are a bit more advanced or specific. If you're ready to explore that, you can click the Join button. If not, that's perfectly fine. Let's continue with the next principle. Section 4. Principle 3. Master the psychology of debt and leverage. Most of us were taught that debt is a trap and a sign of being irresponsible. For most people, it is. Consumer debt from credit cards and car loans is a financial burden designed to keep you making payments. But for some, debt is one of their most effective tools. Machiavelli advised that leaders should never become dependent on others, because dependence is weakness. Following this idea, the wealthy don't become dependent on debt, they use debt as a tool to acquire assets that pay for the debt themselves. Consider a real estate investor. They might use the bank's money, a loan, to buy an apartment building. Then the rent paid by tenants is used to pay off that loan, cover expenses, and create a profit for the investor. They've just used leverage to control a large asset with a relatively small amount of their own money. They turn debt into a tool for growth. The poor often take on debt to consume things that lose value, like cars and electronics. The rich often take on debt to acquire assets that produce income, like businesses and properties. Machiavelli also taught that fear is a more consistent motivator than affection. The financial system is built on this psychological truth. You pay your mortgage or credit card bill not out of affection for the bank, but out of an understanding of the consequences of not paying. The bank has influence because of those potential consequences. People who understand this psychology often seek to be on the other side of that equation. They become the lenders or the investors. They control who gets capital, turning the goals of others into their own asset base. This requires changing your relationship with debt. Stop seeing it only as something to fear and start seeing it as a powerful tool that you can either be controlled by or learn to control. Section 5. Principle 4. Be respected for your frugality, not liked for your generosity. Here's an idea from Machiavelli that seems to go against our modern culture of appearances. Avoid trying to get a reputation for generosity. He said a leader who is too generous will quickly use up their resources. To keep being generous, they'll need help, which can eventually cause resentment. Think of the person who is always treating others and lending money freely to be liked. They may eventually find themselves in a tough spot financially, and once the money's gone, their friends might be too. In this view, generosity can be self-defeating. The more you use it, the less capacity you have for it. Machiavelli argued it's more practical to build a reputation for being careful with your money, even if some people might call you frugal at first. Over time, people will see that your financial discipline is what makes you self-sufficient and stable. You don't need to borrow from anyone. You don't have to say yes to bad opportunities out of need. Your financial discipline builds a form of protection around you. This reputation for being disciplined with your resources can act as a natural filter. People with poorly thought out ideas may not ask you for investment, and people looking for handouts may learn to look elsewhere. This respect, not for you personally, but for your high standards and refusal to be wasteful, can provide a more reliable form of security than the inconsistent affection that might be bought with free dinners. As Machiavelli suggested, love is dependent on the gratitude of others, but a healthy respect for your standards is more dependable because it's based on what you control. The goal is to stop trying to buy affection. Real stability comes not from being liked for what you give away, but from being respected for what you refuse to waste. Conclusion. The key idea here is that money often operates within a game of power, strategy, and psychology. For a long time, you may have been playing by one set of rules while the masters of the game were playing by another. They seem to understand what Machiavelli knew 500 years ago. Money follows control, not just hard work. Wealth is often the result of strategic positioning, leverage, and a clear-eyed understanding of the systems that guide human behavior. So you have a choice. You can continue to follow the conventional path, focusing your energy on working within someone else's system and hoping you'll be fairly rewarded. You can remain a reliable, hard-working employee and trust that the rules will eventually work out in your favor. Or you can adjust your mindset. You can start to see the world as it is, a field of competing interests. You can start to think more like a strategist. This means managing your money like a resource. Use it to acquire a better position, not just more comfort. Understand that leverage is a tool, your reputation is a defense, and your focus is your most valuable asset. It's about learning the real principles of influence, building your own system, and directing the flow of money for yourself. It's not always easy, and it often requires you to be uncomfortable, but it is the path to greater financial independence. If you're ready to stop thinking like just a player and start acting like a strategist, subscribe to this channel. We're dedicated to exploring the practical ideas that aren't always discussed.